Attention all grill masters and backyard barbecue enthusiasts. Lynn's has everything you need to make your 4th of July cookout a success. From sizzling certified Angus beef steaks and mouth-watering burgers to fresh cut fruit and all the condiments you desire, we have you covered. Browse our weekly ad for celebratory savings like 39 cents per pound seedless watermelon through July 4th and shop online at lynsgrocery.com for extra convenience. Lynn's, where delicious begins.
At Grainger, we're for the ones who specialize in saving the day and for the ones who've mastered the art of keeping business moving. We offer industrial-grade supplies for every industry with same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders, all backed by real people ready to help. So you can get the right answers and products right when you need them. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
You're listening to the Best Morning Routine Ever podcast, the show that proves no one stumbles upon success ever. With your host, Lou Need. Every Mondays and Thursdays, we deliver cold hard evidence behind the power of a robust morning routine. Get ready to be transformed by the renewal of your mind.
Hello, morning enthusiasts. Welcome to the Best Morning Routine Ever podcast. I am your host, Dr. Lou Need, and today I have the honor of introducing a very special guest to the show, Jen McInnis. She is a comedian, keynote speaker, and over 20 years, she's traveled the country doing just that, sharing her unique and practical tips on how to use humor in business. That's right. It's a business skill. You have to know how to navigate that space to make profit, essentially, right? So we're going to talk to her today about some of her experiences because she has written for Jay Leno too, the Jay Leno's Tonight Show. And so we have a celebrity among us. Jen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm a celebrity. Yay.
Yes. Tell us about what it's like, even for just writing for the show. You to be handpicked, that's a big deal.
Well, I was not on staff. I was a freelance writer. And so what you did, this was years ago. You might be too young to remember fax machines.
I do remember them.
Okay. Well, you used to be able to, if, once you got approved, you could send a fax in and with jokes, and then they would decide what jokes they want to buy. They had hundreds of comedians doing this. So it was very competitive, but I got a lot of jokes on, and you would just get a check in the mail, like whatever, a month later. And then you call his assistant and she would tell you, it was the balloon joke or whatever it was. And so you'd know which one it was. And in fact, I got a nice note. I ran into one of his head writers a few years ago and in the green room, and he said, "Oh, Jan McInnis." He said, "You used to submit material." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh, yeah, you were one of the comedians. We actually read the jokes." So it was very nice.
Yeah. Well, do you remember one of the jokes that were used?
The first one I ever sold it was right before the Super Bowl, which is appropriate for today because the Super Bowl, I don't know when this is going to air, but recording it prior to the Super Bowl. And it was something to the effect of a lot of vendors are going to be selling counterfeit sports items. You can tell if it's a counterfeit sports jersey if you can afford it. So that's so that was it was probably written a little better, but that's from my clouded memory.
Yeah. Good. So let's dive into how you had to learn to manage this as a business.
Yes. Yes. And I'd like to thank you for calling it a business. A lot of people don't think entertainment and even keynote speaking is a business. A lot of comedians, a lot of entertainers, go into it because they don't want to do business. But I'm telling you, it's more of a business than most people think. I mean, it's a business. You have to, I do more marketing than I do, traveling. I mean, I'm up every day marketing, working on my writing, doing outreach, social media, all that stuff to get the bookings. So it is a business, and you really need to, I was very fortunate before being a comedian. And I've been in this business full-time over 25 years, no waitressing involved, which is pretty good. But before that, I was a marketing executive in Washington, D.C. area. And so my marketing was actually better than my act when I first started out. I knew how to get the work. And so that marketing background has really helped me in entertainment.
Yeah, because you are the business. You had to market yourself, get yourself out in front of the right people.
Yeah.
And during that time, what were you using? Because right now, the social media is very big for that, making it a lot easier. But when you started out, what were
When
you
I started out, it was, you know what, we all had a phone card. You'd be traveling and you'd have to pull over to payphone and dial the 85 digits on the phone card and make phone calls to comedy clubs to get the work. Then you'd have to send out a VHS tape because there were no websites. And you'd send out a VHS tape and you'd send up a packet of information. And that, progressed until DVDs came out. And still when I started doing the keynotes, it was still a big, thick, packet of information. It cost probably $8-9 to mail. And it was sort of a catch-22. You want to get people interested enough to ask for your packet, but you really don't want to put those together because it was a lot. So I'd have packet day once a week and I would do, the 20 or 30 packets that I needed to send out. And then lots of follow-up.
Is it very competitive?
For the keynotes and comedy, it is competitive. I would say it is, but if you're good and you're consistent and you keep at it, don't worry about the competition. Do your own thing, and people will get into you.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good marketing. A general, like, it could be applied. It transcends in every business.
It's funny when I started out because I had missed the whole comedy boom of the 80s. I didn't get into comedy until the 90s, and I would have comedians who'd been around in the 80s where the money was just phenomenal in comedy clubs. You could make a good living just being an MC working because they paid them very well. The money went away and all that in the 90s. Comedy clubs closed. And I had a comedian once tell me, boy, this would be terrible to have to start now. But you don't know what you don't know. And I didn't know. I was too naive to know how hard it would be. So I just went forward and thought, well, I'm starting where I'm starting, and I would give that advice to anyone. You start where you start. Now I would look at a comedian and go, oh, how hard would it be to get out there? And the money's even lower and it's harder. But you start where you start and you do what you do. So you can't worry about it if you really want to do it.
Especially if it's something that is innate and intrinsically, that's something you want to do.
Yeah.
You should not let that stop you, right? Because you're going to set your own mark.
Right. If you wait and you put it off, all that's going to happen is you're going to get older. You're just, you're not going to get anywhere close to it. And what's interesting is the different paths. If you're open to it, like when you think of comedian, you think comedy club, right? You think comedy club. Well, that's what I thought. I didn't even know keynote speaker was a profession. I had no idea. I'm doing something I never heard of. And I knew comedy writing, and I certainly did a lot of comedy writing as well. But it transitioned. I started looking around for, other ways to make money and not have to work all my nights and weekends and get up at, on stage at 1 a.m. on a Friday show with a bunch of drunks. And I was kind of, not that everyone's drunk on a Friday, but I was, a lot of clubs I was working, it was, kind of crazy. And so I started looking around and I started talking, I kind of knew about the corporate comedy. And so I kind of drifted into doing that, but it was still a lot of nights and they weren't drunks. They were at big conventions and such, and it was fun. But then, I talked to some people who said, we want to have a comedian, but we really need a message. And I kind of did some research and found out, keynote speaking. So if you're open to the possibilities, you move your progressions through into different things. So it might look differently as you get older, as you get wanting to move away from one thing. I don't want to go back into comedy clubs. I don't want to. Corporate comedy is fine. I do some of it, but the keynotes, I love them because they're during the day and the crowds are great and they love the message. And I draw from a lot of my experiences in comedy, how it applies to business.
Yeah, because you're saying essentially you won't have all the ducks in a row when you initially start out. So a lot of it is going to be revealed to you after you take the first step.
It does, correct,
like
yeah.
Yeah, it's like driving, you have the first 200 feet, your headlights.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, oh, wait, I can do this with driving, I can do that. The same with comedy. And there are comedians who love the clubs and stay in them, and that's totally fine too. But if, I was always looking around and kind of open to what else is out there. And I found it, so.
Yeah, so tell us about the business aspect of it in terms of like when you do with corporations and businesses, what do you touch on?
Well, my most popular keynote is titled Finding the Funny in Change. And it's how to use humor to handle change. So I go on stage and I do a lot of humor, clean, appropriate humor, but I also give tips. How do comedians deal with change? How can you deal with change using humor? How can you diffuse tension? Because a lot of times comedians, we're brought on stage after something weird has happened. I mean, I've been brought on after people were laid off. I've been brought on after, something weird has happened on stage after 2,000 awards have been given out. How do we change that energy? And I talk a lot about how do comedians do it and how you can do it too. If you sit down to a staff meeting, how do you change that energy? If something weird has happened, something, you've had budget cuts or no more free coffee in the staff room, how do you do that? And so I talk about that. I talk about kicking off tough conversations. As comedians, we have to, we sometimes get in situations where we have to change the energy quickly. And I talk about that. And I talk about just using humor in your communications.
Yeah, I like that. Because there's change management. There's definitely a lot of that takes place in the corporate. And
I also talk about for sales. I show businesses how to use humor in their communications and for sales and for marketing because, humor is a great way to connect instantly with people, get people to want to listen to you, people to remember you and your message. If you can use a little bit, we're not talking about in corporate, we're not talking about being a comedian. We're talking about using a little bit of good, well-placed humor to get people to kind of open up and to connect with them.
Yeah. And how do you do that as it pertains to sales? Give us a tip.
I just talk about a lot of different tips when you go in. Do a little bit of research on the group or the person. Oh, gosh, I've got about 20 different tips. Everything's in my head. But it's just about finding the humor in the situation. A lot of situational stuff where you're, I don't know if a good example. Okay, I was doing an event one time and they gave out 292 service pins for years of service. Okay. And people walked to the stage, got their pin, walked back. It was like a 4 or 5 hour award ceremony. All right. And then they put me up at like midnight. And so I kind of threw out a fun question. I changed the energy quickly by just jumping up and saying, we had 292 award service pins. I think I got my 5-year pin just sitting here. And change the energy and get people to laugh. And you can do that in business and sales too. If something has happened weird, by sort of acknowledging it and using humor.
Yeah. And what's the benefit of like laughter and humor? Because it does, as you say, lightens up the load, but it releases serotonin as well, making people happy and more receptive to what you have to say.
They are. And they also, they'll remember you. They'll want to listen to you. I mean, who wants to listen? I've sat into a lot of conventions where the speaker ahead of me is giving some very important information. It might be on, healthcare reform or something, but people's eyes are glazing over because it's an hour or 2 hours of just, too much information. So I'm brought in a lot of times to kind of give people some information, but also a little bit of levity and give them a little bit of a mental break. There's also some studies, not a ton on humor and health, but a few saying things like, it helps burn calories. It opens up your blood vessels. So you have less chance of heart attack and stroke. It opens up deeper breathing, all sorts of sort of health benefits too. And, forget about those. What does it feel like when you laugh? I mean, can't you just feel like you're feeling better, right?
Right.
Health benefits. I mean, laughing beats stress, so might as well laugh.
Might as well. And I heard something earlier today in my workout class that your body doesn't know the difference because we're sitting there in pain, but the instructor said, just laugh it out.
Yeah. Your subconscious mind doesn't know. It's whatever you're feeding your subconscious mind. If you're saying the situation is awful, that's what you're reacting to. Your subconscious mind is going to take that in. So you might as well get yourself laughing. And again, laughter instantly changes the energy in a room. And again, in business, you're not trying to be a comedian club funny. You're just trying to get everyone to take a breath and, relax for a second and have a moment. And people I get the question a lot, what if it doesn't go over well? Well, in business, as long as you stay away from, sex, drugs, rock and roll, politics, probably, you're probably going to be safe in using humor. Use your common sense, but people aren't going to get mad at you if it's not a killer joke. They're usually just happy that you're trying to lighten up the situation, and they're usually appreciative.
Yeah, and you get the message stays. It sticks longer.
Mm-hmm. It does stick longer. People remember. That's funny. If you go to a comedy club, you'll remember the jokes more than you'll remember the comedian, but you will remember the the humor. You walked out with, oh yeah, that guy did that funny joke about the boat, but you can't even remember the person's name, right?
Right. So even that brings me to storytelling, right? Like we're innately, we are driven by stories. We want to hear stories, and we remember things that are associated with stories.
Right.
Let's talk about the importance of that in the business aspect, or even as a comedian, how to kind of foster that.
I do some storytelling in my keynotes. I'm not a big storyteller when I get on stage to do comedy because it has to be really good with a huge punchline at the end. My jokes are more with the comedy setup punch, like a kind of Rodney Dangerfield or Jay Leno. You know, if you don't like this joke, you'll like this joke. I do probably 3 or 4 jokes a minute. Storytelling is an art, and I do it when keynotes when I don't have to be killer funny, but you want to kind of draw people in. But it's a good way to make a point of something if you can bring a story, and if you can add humor to the story, even better.
Yeah, and even in the branding, since you have the marketing background, the branding aspect of it, let's talk about the marketing, how storytelling is so effective.
Yeah, well, I go by the work lady only because I used to do a lot of work humor and nobody can spell or pronounce my last name. So I thought the work lady, and there I do stories about work and stories about life, and that kind of helps with my brand.
Very, very nice. So let's talk about some of the skills, some of the habits that you have to do to make sure that you show up vibrant and laughing and ready to go. So how do you get up, dress up, and show up?
Well, funny you should ask. I heard you talking on a earlier podcast about alarm clocks, and you don't like them, and you said that your purpose will wake you up. And I was thinking, well, my bank account will wake me up. You think of comedians and entertainers as more night people, but I'm more of a morning. I have morphed into more of a morning person. When I'm home and not having to travel somewhere, I don't use an alarm clock, but I generally just wake up around 6 a.m. If I'm traveling, I usually take the 6 a.m. flight out, so I get up pretty early. I'm more creative in the morning, so I get up and I used to write for. I've written for tons of people, but one thing I wrote a lot for was radio, and I would write 15 jokes a day for hundreds of radio stations around the country, and they were always on news stories. And so even though I don't do that anymore, I still look at the news. I want to see what's going on. When I get up, I want to flip through the news, find out what the stories are. So if I can reference it when I'm on stage, if I can reference something that's happening, I don't get political, I don't get religious, but I will, if there's something funny that's happened, I can certainly bring that up. I like to that's kind of my first thing I do in the morning. I've tried to meditate. I fall asleep, so that's not good. But I try to start with a morning routine of something. Like when I wrote for radio, my first 2 hours of the day were writing those 15 jokes. Now I don't do that, but my first hour of the day, I would say, would be I read the news, I do something that gets me into work, which is I look at my spam folders and I make sure that I've cleared spam, and I kind of do the kind of admin tasks that need to be done. The real easy ones that kind of click off real fast, so you feel like you've accomplished something really early.
Oh, yeah. That's a hack to being productive and fighting off procrastination.
So I just jump in and do that stuff. And then I have a database. I just saw recently comics talking about, do you have a database? A lot of entertainers don't. And I think, why? My database gives me my to-do list for today. And I like it because I can go through, check things off. I can see what is right ahead of me, and I dive in. And I don't usually miss things like podcast interviews and stuff like that because I've got it sort of structured. It's a lot more structured than people would think with an entertainer. I'm a lot more structured, and that's not to say that I sit down and say, okay, now I'm going to write and I'm going to come up with stuff. I do that some, but I also, when I want to write, I take a walk for maybe an hour. And I kind of get my head together and I let things gel. And that's where I come up with a lot of the humor and a lot of the stories and ideas.
Hey, walking is a form of meditation, Jen.
Yeah, okay, good. And it doesn't put me to sleep. So
that's fantastic. Let's go ahead and tell us, where can we find you? How can we connect with you?
Yeah, great. Connect with me on my website, theworklady.com. You can sign up for my newsletter where I tell a story 3 times a year. You can also go to LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, very active. And let's see, I'm on Instagram, jan.mcinnis, MCINNIS. Jan.McInnis on Instagram. Please connect with me. I think I have 12 followers. So I'm getting more into social media, but yeah, and go to my YouTube channel. Yeah. Funny female keynote speaker.
Excellent. So what is one thing you want to leave us? It could be a quote, a book you're reading.
I just read a great book about boy, that was a good book. It was a good book. I'll leave you with a quote because I just did an article on my LinkedIn and people really like it. It's about how Dolly Parton helped my career. So go to my LinkedIn, check that out. But the quote is, you have more power than you think you do. So when things are not going well, when you're not sure what to do, dig deep inside. You really have more power than you think you do, and go with your gut.
Start from that space, that place. A lot of hope. I love it. Thank you for sharing. Jen, it's been a pleasure and delight having you on.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course.
All right, morning enthusiasts, that's it for today's show. Thank you for tuning in. If you love the Best Morning Routine Ever podcast, we'd love to hear from you. So go ahead and subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes or Google Play. While you're at it, tell a friend about the show. Be sure to visit bestmorningroutineever.com and our Facebook group to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our fantastic free bonus content. Until next time.
Okay, it's official. We are very much in the final sprint to Election Day. And face it, between debates, polling releases, even court appearances, it can feel exhausting, even impossible to keep up with. I'm Brad Mielke. I'm the host of Start Here, the daily podcast from ABC News. And every morning, my team and I get you caught up on the day's news in a quick, straightforward way that's easy to understand, with just enough context so you can listen, get it, and go on with your day. So, kickstart your morning. Start smart with Start Here and ABC News, because staying informed shouldn't feel overwhelming.